The scream that shattered the peaceful afternoon at Riverside Park wasn't from a child who'd fallen off the monkey bars. It was from a man who'd just discovered that grabbing 8-year-old Lucy Martinez while her mother wasn't looking was the worst mistake he'd ever made. Chen moved with a speed and precision that shocked everyone present. But what surprised witnesses most was how a 70-year-old retiree seemed to know exactly how to neutralize a potential kidnapper. It had been a typical Tuesday afternoon in the quiet suburb of Maplewood. Chen sat on his usual bench near the playground, enjoying the October sunshine while reading a paperback novel. At 70, he maintained the straight posture and alert eyes that had served him well during his military career, though his neighbors simply saw him as the polite widower who kept his lawn immaculate and always waved when they passed. Lucy Martinez was playing on the swings about 30 feet away, her long dark hair catching the sunlight as she pumped her legs to go higher. Her mother, Sophia, was sitting at a picnic table nearby, absorbed in a work call that had apparently become more complicated than expected. "I understand the deadline, but the client is requesting major changes," Sophia was saying into her phone, occasionally glancing toward Lucy, but clearly focused on her conversation. Robert had noticed the man in the gray hoodie about 10 minutes earlier. Mid-30s, average height, carrying a small backpack. He'd been walking the perimeter of the playground, ostensibly watching his own child, but Robert's trained I had picked up several concerning details. The man never interacted with any of the children. His attention kept returning to Lucy specifically, and he was gradually moving closer to her while staying out of Sophia's line of sight. Robert closed his book and shifted position on the bench to get a better view. 20 years in military intelligence had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The man was now positioned behind the swing set, directly in Lucy's path but invisible to Sophia, who was still deep in her phone conversation at the picnic table. Robert watched as the stranger checked his surroundings, then began moving purposefully toward Lucy. "Hey, sweetie," the man said in a low voice as he approached the swings. "Your mom sent me to come get you. She's waiting for you by the car." Lucy slowed her swing, looking confused. "My mom's over there," she said, pointing toward the picnic table. "No, she had to move the car," the man insisted, reaching for her arm. "She said to tell you it's time to go home now." That's when Robert moved. In one fluid motion, Robert stood up from the bench and covered the 30 feet between himself and the swing set with surprising speed for a man his age. Years of physical training might have faded, but muscle memory and tactical awareness remained sharp. "Lucy, stay exactly where you are," Robert called out in a voice that carried absolute authority. The man in the hoodie spun around, startled to find someone behind him. "Hey, mind your own business, soul man. I'm just..." Robert was already positioning himself between the stranger and Lucy, his stance shifting into something that witnesses later described as suddenly very military. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the child," Robert said calmly. "Now, look, I don't know who you think you are, but..." The man started to argue, then made the mistake of reaching toward Lucy again. Robert's response was swift and decisive. He grabbed the man's wrist with one hand while simultaneously placing his other hand on the stranger's shoulder, applying pressure to a specific point that immediately caused the man to gasp in pain and drop to one knee. "I said step away," Robert repeated, his voice still calm, but now carrying an unmistakable edge of controlled danger. The man tried to pull free, but Robert's grip was precise and unrelenting. "Let go of me. You can't just..." "Lucy, go to your mother right now," Robert commanded without taking his eyes off the stranger. "Tell her call 911. By now, Sophia had noticed the commotion and was rushing over, her phone call forgotten. "What's happening? Lucy, are you okay?" "This man was trying to convince your daughter to leave with him," Robert explained, maintaining his hold on the would-be kidnapper. "He told her you'd send him to get her." Sophia's face went pale. "I've never seen this man before in my life." The stranger was now struggling more frantically, trying to break free from Robert's grip. "This is assault. You can't hold me like this." "Actually, I can," Robert replied matter-of-factly. "Citizen's arrest for attempted kidnapping." "Ma'am, did you call the police?" "Yes, they're on their way," Sophia confirmed. Her voice shaking, all staring in amazement at the elderly man who had single-handedly subdued someone half his age. "Dude, how did you do that?" asked the young father who'd witnessed the entire incident. "Are you like a martial arts instructor or something?" "Something like that," Robert said simply, adjusting his grip slightly as the man tried once more to escape. Detective Sarah Williams arrived with backup officers within 6 minutes. She took one look at the scene. Elderly man in a cardigan holding a struggling suspect in what appeared to be a professional restraint technique, and immediately knew this wasn't a typical citizen intervention. "Sir, I'm Detective Williams. Can you tell me what happened here?" Robert maintained his hold while giving a precise, chronological account of what he'd observed. His terminology was specific, his recall detailed, and his description of the suspect's behavior patterns read like a professional threat assessment. "Mr. Detective Williams prompted. Chen. Robert Chen. Mr. Chen, that's an impressive restraint technique you're using. Where did you learn that?" "Military training," Robert replied as officers moved in to take custody of the suspect. "What branch?" "Army Intelligence. 20 years active duty." Detective Williams nodded with understanding. That explained the situational awareness, the precise responses, and the professional way Robert was handling what could have been a chaotic situation. As the suspect was being handcuffed, he spat angrily at Robert. "You broke my wrist, you crazy old man." "Your wrist isn't broken," Robert corrected calmly. "I applied pressure to the radial nerve cluster. Temporary discomfort, no permanent damage." "Military police training covers civilian apprehension protocols," Robert explained, "though it's been a few years since I've had to use them." Sophia Martinez was still holding Lucy tightly, both of them shaken by how close they'd come to disaster. "Mr. Chen, I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't been here—" "You don't need to thank me," Robert said gently. "Just glad Lucy's safe." "But how did you know?" Sophia asked. "I was sitting right there and I didn't notice anything wrong." Robert considered his answer carefully. When you've been trained to spot threats, certain behavior patterns stand out. The man was using classic predator tactics, isolating the target, creating urgency, establishing false authority. He'd been watching Lucy for several minutes before making his approach. "You were watching him watch her?" asked another parent. "I was reading my book," Robert said with a slight smile. But situational awareness becomes second nature after a while. Detective Williams finished her preliminary interview with Robert and the other witnesses. The suspect, who had no identification and wasn't talking, will be processed for attempted kidnapping. His phone contained photos of the playground taken over several previous visits, suggesting this had been planned rather than opportunistic. "Mr. Chen, your intervention probably prevented a serious crime," Detective Williams told him. "Have you considered working with our department? We could use someone with your observation skills for community safety programs." Robert shook his head. "I'm retired. I just want to read my book in peace." "Well, thank you anyway. Not many people would have noticed what you noticed, and fewer still would have known how to handle it." As the police finished their work and the crowd began to disperse, Robert found himself surrounded by curious neighbors he'd barely spoken to in the 5 years since moving to Maplewood. "Mr. Chen," said Janet Walsh from 3 houses down, "I had no idea you were military. You've always been so quiet." "Still am," Robert replied with a small smile. "Just happened to be in the right place at the right time." "That wasn't luck," said Tom Bradley, who'd witnessed the entire confrontation. "That was training. You moved like you'd done that before." "Different circumstances, same principles," Robert acknowledged. Sophia approached with Lucy, who was now calm but still staying close to her mother. "Mr. Chen, Lucy has something she wants to say." The 8-year-old looked up at Robert with wide, serious eyes. "Thank you for keeping me safe." Robert knelt down to Lucy's level. "You're very welcome, Lucy. And remember, if a stranger ever tells you that your mom or dad sent them to get you, always go check with your parent first. Okay?" "Okay." Lucy nodded solemnly. "And Lucy," Robert added, "you did the right thing when you questioned what the man was telling you. Always trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right." Later that evening, Robert was watering his garden when Sophia knocked on his door. "I hope I'm not bothering you," she said. I just wanted to thank you again and to ask, how did you see what was happening when I didn't? I was right there. Robert set down his watering can and considered her question. You were focused on your work call, which is completely normal. But I've been trained to maintain what we call a combat mindset, constantly assessing my environment for potential. Is that something you can teach? Basic situational awareness? Absolutely. It's mostly about knowing what to look for and trusting your instincts when something feels off. Sophia hesitated, then asked, would you be willing to talk to our neighborhood watch group? After today, I think we all realize we need to be more aware of what's happening around our children. Robert looked out at the quiet street where he'd lived peacefully for 5 years. He'd come here to retire, to leave behind the hypervigilance that had defined his military career. But today had reminded him that some skills weren't just professional tools, they were community assets. I'll think about it, he said finally. 3 weeks later, Robert Chen found himself in Sophia's living room, addressing a group of 15 concerned parents from the neighborhood. He'd agreed to share basic awareness techniques, not because he wanted to return his old life, but because he'd realized that protecting people was something he couldn't completely retire from. The goal isn't to make everyone paranoid, Robert told the group. It's to help you recognize unusual patterns of behavior and trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right. Like what you noticed about that man in the park, asked Janet Walsh. Exactly. He was displaying several warning signs. Prolonged observation of a specific child, positioning himself outside the parent's line of sight, and using common manipulation tactics. Once you know what to look for, these patterns become obvious. What should we do if we spot something suspicious? Asked Tom Bradley. Document what you observe, trust your instincts, and don't hesitate to intervene appropriately. Sometimes just the presence of an alert adult is enough to deter criminal behavior. As the meeting concluded, Sophia walked Robert to the door. You know, Robert smiled. She's a smart girl. She'll grow up knowing how to protect herself. Thanks to you. Robert looked out at the peaceful neighborhood where children rode bikes and played in yards without fear. Thanks to all of us. That's how communities stay safe. Everyone looking out for everyone else. 6 months later, the Maplewood Neighborhood Watch program that Robert had helped establish was being used as a model by other communities. Crime in the area had dropped significantly, not because of increased police presence, but because residents had learned to be more aware and to look out for each other. Robert Chen had returned to his quiet retirement, but now his neighbors knew that their safety was being watched over by someone with the skills and experience to keep them protected. And for a career intelligence officer, there was no better way to serve his community than ensuring that children like Lucy could play safely in the park while their parents focused on the ordinary concerns of everyday life. The man who tried to take Lucy was eventually convicted and sentenced to 8 years in prison. At the sentencing, Detective Williams noted that without Robert's intervention, the case might have ended very differently. Robert didn't attend the trial. He was back on his bench in Riverside Park, reading his book and keeping a watchful eye on the playground where children laughed and played under the protection of a community that had learned to see.